I shouldn't have stayed that late. The repair shop was quiet except for the occasional clink of tools, and I was halfway through wiping grease off my hands when she appeared, like she always did when I least expected her, calm and purposeful, with that effortless kind of confidence that made the rest of the world feel slightly off balance. "Still here?" she asked, leaning against the counter, one eyebrow slightly raised. She wasn't smiling, exactly, but there was something in the way her gaze lingered that made it feel like a question and a challenge, all at once. I shrugged, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, just finishing up." She walked closer, and I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, subtle, warm, the kind that sticks in your memory without you realizing it. Her hand brushed mine as she took a wrench from the counter. Not enough to notice if you weren't paying attention, but enough for my stomach to tighten in that quiet, ridiculous way. "I always feel like you're too serious," she said, tilting her head as she watched me. Her voice was smooth, precise, like she knew exactly how to say something without really saying it. I wanted to tell her she wasn't supposed to have that effect on me, but my voice felt smaller than usual, like it had been swallowed by the smell of oil and metal. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I focused on tightening a bolt that didn't need tightening. She leaned on the counter, watching me, and I could feel the subtle weight of her attention. It wasn't flattery or flirtation. It was something quieter, something that made the air between us feel dense with possibility, though I wouldn't have admitted it out loud. Then she laughed softly, a short, low sound that made me glance up. She was studying me, but not in a way that felt invasive. More like she was cataloging me, like she could see the lines I didn't usually show, the hesitation behind my easy shrug. "You know," she said, tilting her head again, "you never just sit still, even when you think you are." Her words weren't an accusation. They were a statement, and I didn't know whether to feel exposed or grateful, or both. My fingers tightened on the wrench for a second longer than necessary. She caught it, that small movement, and her smile softened, just slightly. A shadow passed over the counter from the dim shop light hitting her just right, and for an instant, everything else, the clatter of tools, the smell of oil, the quiet hum of the fluorescent bulbs overhead, faded. She was close enough now that the air shifted when she moved, and I couldn't decide whether I wanted her to leave or stay. "You've got grease on your cheek," she said suddenly, brushing it off with a finger. There was nothing sexual in the gesture, just careful, intentional. And yet, the way her hand lingered for a heartbeat too long made my chest tighten. I smiled, awkward, like I was trying to laugh it off, but the smile didn't reach my eyes. "Guess I'm not perfect," I muttered. She gave me a look, one of those looks that made you feel both seen and invisible at the same time. And then she was gone, slipping out the side door with that calm, confident stride, leaving me with the wrench in my hand and the echo of her presence in the quiet shop. I didn't notice how late it had gotten, didn't notice the cold creeping in from the cracked window. All I could think about was the brief brush of her fingers on my cheek and the way her eyes had held mine, unflinching, unspoken. I stayed a little longer, pretending to finish some imaginary task, but the image of her lingered, like a faint spark refusing to die. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. She was hunched over the old typewriter again, fingers brushing the keys with that careful, precise motion that always seemed deliberate, like she was afraid to let herself make a mistake. I stood nearby, leaning against the edge of the desk, pretending to organize papers, but really just watching. "You're taking forever," I said, trying for casual. My voice felt too loud in the quiet room. She didn't look up. "I like it done right," she replied, flat, almost clipped. Her tone wasn't cold, exactly, but it wasn't warm either. It was the kind of tone that made you feel like you were crossing a boundary just by existing in the same space. I watched her hands for a moment. Long fingers, knuckles faintly white from the pressure she was applying, small lines from too much typing and too little rest. She rubbed the back of her neck, a subtle gesture, almost apologetic, almost tired. I noticed. I always noticed. "You could rest a little," I said softly, leaning closer. She flinched ever so slightly, though she didn't move away. That was new. "I'm fine," she said, not meeting my eyes. The words sounded automatic, practiced. But her voice had a rough edge, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might break. I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't. I just kept watching, keeping quiet, letting the room breathe between us. The sunlight fell across the desk in uneven stripes, and the dust motes drifted lazily in the air. She sighed, barely audible, and I thought it might have been meant for me. "You've been at this for hours," I said finally, trying to keep my tone light. Her fingers stilled on the keys. She looked up, eyes momentarily soft, and I caught a flicker of something. Hesitation, exhaustion, maybe relief that I had noticed without asking too many questions. She shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Sometimes I can't stop until it's done." Her voice cracked just slightly on the last word. It was such a small thing, but somehow it landed. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I didn't say anything. Instead, I moved a little closer, letting my shoulder brush hers while pretending to adjust a stack of papers. She didn't pull away. A quiet laugh escaped her then, soft and fleeting, the kind that seemed to come from the back of her throat, unguarded. I caught it, felt it, and my stomach did that strange, tight flip. The tension in her shoulders eased for a fraction of a second, and I wondered if she even realized she'd let someone see that small crack in her armor. She looked at me, briefly, eyes catching mine in a way that made the air feel charged. There was no declaration, no confession, just a moment. A glance that lingered too long, a hand that rested on the edge of the desk near mine. And for a second, just a second, it felt like the room had shrunk to the space between us. I didn't move. I couldn't. I just stayed there, letting the quiet hum of the typewriter, the warm light, and the faint, unspoken pull between us fill the space. And I realized I couldn't stop thinking about that small, fleeting laugh. The rain had started hours ago, drumming against the roof with a steady insistence that made the office feel smaller, more contained. She was seated across from me at the cluttered table, a mug of tea in her hands, steam curling up between us like a thin, invisible veil. We hadn't said much. It wasn't silence exactly, but the kind of quiet that hums under conversation, words half-spoken, sentences left unfinished. I watched the way her eyes lingered on the paper in front of her, then flicked up at me, and my chest tightened for a reason I couldn't name. "You don't look like you're thinking about the numbers," she said finally, voice low, careful. Not a tease, something else. Concern? Curiosity? Maybe both. I'm thinking about how you managed to stay so calm," I admitted before I could stop myself. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but she looked down again, fingers tightening around her mug. We were closer than usual. The storm outside made the office dim, the fluorescent lights soft, and for a moment, the space between us seemed smaller than it should have been. My elbow brushed against hers as I reached for a pen. Neither of us moved away, and suddenly I felt all the unspoken things hovering, heavier than the rain pounding the roof. "I used to stay up all night like this," she said quietly, almost to herself, "trying to fix things I didn't even know how to fix." Her gaze lifted then, brief, flickering, and I thought I saw a shadow of vulnerability. I wanted to say something, anything that would make her look at me differently, make her feel seen, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I let my hand hover near hers on the table, close enough to touch, not close enough to cross the line. The sudden vibration of her phone on the table startled us both. She glanced down, a flicker of tension passing across her features. "An unknown number," she said, her thumb hovering over the screen. "A friend, probably, or someone she didn't want to talk to right now." She silenced it, and the moment was gone, but it left that lingering electricity, that sharp awareness of how close we had been. Her fingers brushed mine accidentally as she reached for the sugar bowl. I froze, and so did she. Eyes met, mine wide. Hers caught somewhere between amusement and something I couldn't read. The storm outside filled the gaps in conversation with a quiet roar. I wanted to reach across, just once, to close that distance, but the thought of the unspoken rules, the office, the difference in age, everything that could go wrong, held me back. I stayed still, letting the brush of her hand linger for a heartbeat too long. She exhaled softly, almost a sigh, and the moment was gone as quickly as it had appeared. She looked back down at her mug, her shoulders tensing again, and I knew we had both felt it. The pull, the almost, the what if. I stayed seated, hand frozen near hers, heart pounding, realizing that this tiny, fleeting proximity, was more than enough to keep me awake long after the storm had passed. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't empty but full of the weight of words neither of us wanted to say. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, and watched her pace slowly, her hands brushing over the countertop as if grounding herself in something solid. I don't know what we're doing," she said finally, voice low, almost swallowed by the hum of the old refrigerator. I froze. It wasn't a question, exactly. It was a confession. Something raw, unfiltered, and it landed like a stone in the middle of the room. "I mean," she trailed off, gaze dropping to the floor. Her hands twisted together, knuckles white. "I thought I did, but now." Her voice cracked, just a little, and I felt it like a punch to the chest. I wanted to speak, to say something clever, something that would fix it. But cleverness wouldn't fix this. I stayed silent, letting her words hang between us, heavy and impossible to ignore. Her eyes finally met mine, and for a long moment, we just looked at each other. Not the playful, teasing glances from before, something deeper, rawer. Something that made it impossible to pretend we were just two people occupying the same space. "I keep thinking, maybe I'm too old for this," she said quietly, a shadow crossing her face. "Or maybe I'm just too messed up." She laughed softly, a humorless sound, and shook her head. "And you're too young for all of this." And yet, her voice trailed off, and I knew she didn't need to finish. I didn't need to. I could feel it too, the unspoken, impossible pull between us, the confusion, the desire, the fear of what it might mean. I stepped a little closer, but not enough to bridge the distance. She didn't step back. Our proximity was charged, silent, impossible to ignore, and yet the words to cross that line were nowhere to be found. "Do you ever think," she said, almost whispering, "that maybe we're making a mistake just by being here?" "I think about it," I admitted, voice low. "More than I probably should." Her eyes softened, briefly, with something I couldn't name. Maybe relief that I'd admitted it, maybe sadness that we were trapped in this undefined space. She sat down slowly, head in her hands, and I stayed standing, close enough to touch, far enough not to. For a long time, we just breathed, the sound of the air between us louder than our words, filled with tension, regret, and something that felt dangerously like longing. Finally, she looked up at me, eyes glistening, voice almost breaking. "I don't want to ruin whatever this is, but I don't know if I can handle it either." And in that moment, I realized how fragile we were, how the line between wanting and destroying was thinner than I'd ever imagined. I wanted to say something, anything, to make it better, but all I could do was watch her, knowing that the worst part wasn't what we'd done. It was what we'd feel for each other long before anything ever happened. She had been quiet all evening, tracing the rim of her coffee mug with a finger, staring out the rain-streaked window like she could see something far beyond the streetlights. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words felt clumsy, too loud for the fragile space we occupied. Finally, she spoke, voice low, almost hesitant. "I used to come here years ago, after he left." Her fingers stilled, and she swallowed hard, a flicker of something unspoken in her eyes. I froze, unsure how to respond. Not because I didn't care, but because the way she said it, so matter-of-fact, so fragile, made the words feel like they belonged to someone else entirely. "I thought I'd never come back," she continued, voice barely above the hum of the street outside. "Not to this cafe, not to this part of myself. And yet, here I am." She let out a soft, humorless laugh, and I noticed the tremor in her hands. I wanted to reach for them, hold them, steady them somehow, but didn't. Instead, I said the first thing that came to mind. "I think, sometimes, things don't leave us, even when we try. You can't just walk away from what's meant to stay." She looked at me then, eyes sharp, searching, and I felt the weight of her past pressing down like an invisible hand. "You don't know him," she said, almost whispering. "And maybe that's why it still hurts." He, he left, but he didn't disappear. A silence fell, heavy and uncomfortable. I wasn't sure if I should ask more, pry, or just stay quiet. My fingers brushed the edge of the table. I realized I could feel her sorrow in my own chest, like it was a wave I couldn't stop from reaching me. I keep thinking about him, she admitted finally. And I hate that I do. But I can't, it's like a shadow I can't shake. Her voice cracked slightly, and the air between us thickened, charged not with tension or desire, but with shared vulnerability. I swallowed, voice low. I think everyone has those shadows. The ones that come back when you least expect them. The ones that remind you how alive you are and how fragile. Her eyes softened then, a little, not fully, but enough. She exhaled, leaning back in her chair, and for a brief moment, I saw her as she was behind all the confidence, all the guardedness, a woman shaped by loss, by love, by moments she couldn't forget. And then she reached into her bag and pulled out an old photograph, edges worn, colors faded. She hesitated before sliding it across the table toward me. I picked it up carefully. A younger version of her smiled in the frame, arm linked with someone whose face was both familiar and impossible to place. I didn't think anyone would ever see this, she said quietly. Not really. I looked at her, trying to read her expression, trying to understand what it meant to trust someone with something so intimate. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. The storm outside rattled the windows, but the world inside that small cafe seemed to shrink to just the two of us, the photograph, and the fragile, seismic shift between past and present. And I realized I couldn't stop thinking about the woman across from me, and what she had survived, and what she might let me witness next. The library was empty, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant echo of a door closing somewhere down the hall. We had been walking together in silence for a while, cataloging books, shelving, rearranging, pretending the world outside didn't exist. But the air between us had changed. It had a weight, a quiet insistence that neither of us tried to name. She paused, glancing down at a shelf stacked unevenly with old paperbacks. I waited, pretending to straighten a row of books, but my hands were shaking slightly. The scent of her hair, the faint trace of jasmine she always wore, reached me, and I realized just how close we had gotten without realizing it. I don't think, she began, voice low, almost fragile. She trailed off, eyes meeting mine for just a moment. The words were unnecessary. The pause said more than she could have. I stepped closer, careful, not wanting to overwhelm, and she didn't move away. Our shoulders brushed, a small, fleeting contact that felt heavier than anything we'd shared before. I swallowed, heart tight, realizing how inevitable it had become. I can't keep pretending, I said softly. Not that I want to. But I'm not. I'm not trying to rush anything either. She tilted her head slightly, studying me, eyes flicking down at my hands, at my face, back to mine. Neither am I, she whispered. Her voice was careful, steadying, like she was reminding herself she was allowed to stay here, in this moment, without overthinking it. We moved to sit on the low couch tucked in the corner, dust motes catching in the afternoon sunlight. She leaned back, a little, and I mirrored her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off her. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was shared, mutual, understanding. Her hand hovered over mine for a second, tentative, and I let my fingers brush hers lightly. She didn't pull away. Just the touch, soft and fleeting, sent a ripple through me I couldn't name. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't grand, it was just recognition. Of proximity, of trust, of something quietly earned between two people who had been circling each other for weeks. I like this, she said, barely audible, not to me but to the space around us. Just this. I nodded, feeling the words, the sentiment, more than the syllables. Me too, I said, and it wasn't a promise, it wasn't a declaration. It was acknowledgement, simple, real, and enough. Her forehead leaned against my shoulder almost imperceptibly. I rested my cheek against the top of her head, just for a moment. Enough for the world outside to blur and for all the questions, hesitations, and tension to dissolve into something quiet, private, and steady. We stayed like that for a long while, neither speaking, neither moving, letting the weight of everything unsaid sit comfortably around us. The storm from earlier had faded outside, leaving only the muted light filtering through the blinds, dust drifting lazily. And in that silence, with our fingers brushing and her head resting lightly against me, I realized we didn't need to say more. This, here, now, fragile and imperfect, was enough.